10 amazing but true stories about Lee Marvin. He got kicked out of 15 schools. Not 5, not 8, but 15. He threw a classmate out of a window on the second floor. His own mom couldn't stand him. He dropped out of school for good when he was 18 and joined the Marines just in time for some of the bloodiest fighting in the Pacific. 20 years later, he wins the Academy Award for Best Actor for playing a drunk. He gives half of the Oscar to a horse. A few years later, he can't sing a note, but he makes a song that knocks the Beatles off the top spot in England. But here's what no one saw coming. The most dangerous man in Hollywood got into acting by accident while fixing a toilet. The combat veteran who survived 21 amphibious assaults would be buried next to boxing legend Joe Louis at Arlington National Cemetery. And his headstone wouldn't say anything about any movies. It would say Lee Marvin, PFC, U.S. Marine Corps, World War II. These are 10 important events in Lee Marvin's life that were recorded. Let's get started. First, there was the blue blood rebel who couldn't be tamed. Lamont Waltman Marvin Jr. was born on February 19, 1924, in New York City. He came from a family that should have made a gentleman. His dad, Lamont S., was an advertising executive who ran the Apple Institute in New York and New England. Courtney Washington David, his mother, was a beauty consultant and fashion writer. He was the first cousin, 4 times removed, of Confederate General Robert E. Lee, through his mother's side of the family. That's where he got his name. Robert, his brother, got the same name. This was the old American aristocracy on paper. The Marvin family can trace its roots back to Matthew Marvin Sr., who came to America from Essex, England in 1635 and helped start Hartford, Connecticut. Lee Marvin was also George Washington's second cousin, 6 times removed. His ancestors were from 2 of the most famous families in American history. None of it was important. The boy was a disaster on 2 legs. Later, biographer Dwayne Epstein thought that Marvin might have had undiagnosed attention deficit disorder and dyslexia, which would explain why he did so poorly in school and couldn't sit still. He was sent from one boarding school to another in New York, from Paulding Peekskill Military Academy to another, and he got kicked out of each one for fighting, smoking, skipping school, and being generally disobedient. He later bragged about being kicked out of 15 schools. At one music school it does. He threw a class out of a window on the second floor. His mother and he never got along. She came from a wealthy family in the South and expected things to be nice. What she got was a boy who looked like he wanted to ruin every chance he got. Eventually, he was sent to St. Leo College Preparatory School, a Catholic school in Florida, where the nuns could be stricter with him. But this one detail tells you everything you need to know about Lee Marvin. Florida made him different. The land around the school, not the school itself. Young Lee spent every spare weekend hunting deer, puma, wild turkey, and bobwhite quail in what he called the wilds of the Everglades, which had not yet been mapped. He became a great shot long before the Marines gave him a gun. The boy who couldn't sit through a single class could spend days tracking game through swamps without getting bored. That skill, along with patience, silence, and the ability to stay perfectly still and wait for the right shot, would save his life in the Pacific and shape his career on screen. The kid who got kicked out of 15 schools was already getting ready for war. He didn't know it yet. Second, 21 beaches under fire. Lee Marvin was 17 years old and still failing at sing. Leo's when Pearl Harbor was attacked in December 1941. He knew he couldn't join the military until he finished school. He went back to school, which was the only time schoolwork ever mattered to him long enough to pass. He joined the United States Marine Corps on August 12, 1942, when he was 18 years old, even though his father didn't want him to. He was put in charge of the I Company in the 3rd Battalion of the 24th Marine Regiment and the 4th Marine Division. After training, he became a scout sniper, which meant he worked ahead of the main force to gather information and kill enemy targets. He wasn't sitting in the back and writing reports. He was at the tip of the spear. The 4th Marine Division fought in the Pacific Theater, which meant that they had to move from one island to another to attack heavily fortified Japanese positions. There were no clear lines of battle or safe places. The enemy almost never gave up, so they had to take every yard of jungle and beach. Lee Marvin took part in 21 amphibious assaults. You should really think about that number. He got into a landing craft 21 times, rowed toward a hostile beach, and charged right into enemy fire. The Marines in those landing crafts were easy targets for artillery and machine guns, and the first waves lost a lot of men. Marvin was in those first waves again and again. Quadrillion, annual attacks, and Serpentinian were all attacks. Some of the war's most brutal battles. Most Marines who lived through one amphibious attack thought they were lucky. Lee Marvin lived through 21, but then his luck ran out. The third thing that changed everything was the machine gun burst. On June 18, 1944, during the Battle of Saipan, Lee Marvin's unit was attacking Japanese positions on Mount Taposh when machine gun fire from the enemy crossed their line. Marvin got hit. A bullet cut through his sciatic nerve, which is a terrible wound that should have killed him or left him unable to walk. An enemy sniper also shot him in the foot. He wasn't the only one who died. During the same attack, most of his men were killed. The losses on Saipan were terrible. Marvin spent more than a year in military hospitals, where he had to have several surgeries and go through a long and painful rehabilitation process to learn how to walk again. He was told by doctors that he would always have a limp. He was so determined that he taught himself how to hide the permanent nerve damage well enough that most people didn't notice it in his movies. But the damage was real, and he felt pain from that machine gun burst for the rest of his life. Think about that for a second. Lee Marvin looked like the toughest man alive every time you saw him walk across the screen. He was covering up a wound that never fully healed. He got the Purple Heart and the Presidential Unit Citation for his service. She got the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal, the American Campaign Medal, the World War II Victory Medal, and the Combat Action Ribbon. He was let go from the military with the rank of Private First Class. Marvin was brutally honest about what combat was really like. Unlike many actor veterans who romanticized their service, he said, "I was scared to death. Anyone who wasn't scared wasn't there." In another interview, he said it even more directly. "I got shot in the butt and sent home. That's the truth. A man who says he liked fighting is either lying or stupid." Director John Borman, who worked with Marvin on Point Blank, later said Lay understood violence in a way that most actors never will. When he played a violent man, there was a truth to it that came from having seen men kill and be killed. The threat that audiences saw on screen wasn't acting, it was memory. The plumber who accidentally became an actor is number 4. Lee Marvin was lost after the war. He didn't have much of an education, no job prospects, and a body full of shrapnel and nerve damage. He couldn't get rid of the anger, the frustration, and worst of all, the guilt of being a survivor. Marvin went back to Woodstock, New York, where he worked as a plumber's assistant at a community theater. Other veterans thought about becoming forest rangers or car salesmen. One day in 1946, while he was actually fixing the plumbing behind the scenes, an actor got sick during rehearsals for a Red Cross benefit called 10 Nights in a Barroom. Someone had to step in. Marvin, who was the only person free at the time, was pulled from behind the pipes and pushed onto the stage. Something clicked. The veteran of war who couldn't sit through a lecture found out he could keep an audience's attention. According to biographer Dwayne Epstein, playing music helped him deal with the demons that had been bothering him since the war. Acting didn't make the nightmares go away, but it did give the anger a place to go. That accidental audition got her a summer stock job with the Maverick Theater in 1947, where she made $7 a week. Marvin then went to school at the American Theater Wing in New York with the help of his GI Bill. He was in off-Broadway shows like the original version of Billy Budd in 1949 and started getting small roles on TV shows like Escape, The Big Story, and Treasury Men in Action. In 1951, he got his first movie role, a small part in You're in the Navy Now with another actor who wasn't well known at the time, Charles Bronson. Marvin chose to stay in Hollywood because his experience in the war made him very useful on set. Directors quickly learned that the tall, silver-haired veteran with the gruff voice could make military scenes look real because he had been in them. He could show actors how to hold a rifle correctly, show them how to move in a realistic way during a fight, and make violence feel real in a way that no one else in the room could. The man who started his career fixing toilets would go on to become one of the most famous actors in American movies. Lee Marvin put it best. Broadway was a damn bore. The stage in New York is a busy place. Hollywood at least seemed honest. The 5th scariest villain John Ford ever filmed is this one. Marvin played the bad guy in movie after movie until the early 1950s. He played psychopaths, thugs, and killers in a way that scared both audiences and co-stars. In the 1953 movie The Big Heat, he played Vince Stone, a gangster who throws hot coffee in Gloria Graham's face. This scene shocked audiences and is still one of the most disturbing moments in film noir history. He played a rival motorcycle gang leader in The Wild One that same year with Marlon Brando. John Ford gave Marvin the part that made him famous in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, though. In 1962, Marvin played the title role next to John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart, who were 2 of the biggest stars in Hollywood history. Marvin played Liberty Valance with such cold-blooded authority that he stole the show in every scene he was in, even when he was standing next to the Duke. The title of the movie tells you everything. The man who shot Liberty Valance is the main character in the story. That's how dangerous Marvin made the character. His death was the most important event in the movie because he was so scary. Wayne liked Marvin, maybe because of how intense he was, and asked for him to play Donovan's Reef the next year. James Coburn, who was also known for playing tough roles, once said, "When Lee walked onto a set, there was an immediate shift in the atmosphere. Everyone straightened up a bit. There was something genuinely dangerous about him that you couldn't quite put your finger on, but you definitely felt it. Here's what made Lee Marvin different from every other screen villain of that era. The other actors were pretending. Marvin was simply being himself in front of a camera, and the camera knew the difference. Number 6, he won the Oscar playing a drunk and gave half to a horse. In 1965, everything changed. Lee Marvin, the career villain, was offered a dual role in Cat Ballou, a comedic western starring Jane Fonda. Kirk Douglas had been offered the part first, but his agent turned it down thinking it was too small. Douglas later wrote in his 2007 memoir, "My agent talked me out of it because he thought the part was too small." Lee Marvin played the role and won an Oscar. My agent made a bad choice. Marvin was in 2 roles. Kid Shalene is a hopeless, stumbling drunk who can barely stay on his horse. The Anton Strawn, Shalene's brother, a cold-blooded killer with a fake silver nose. People had never seen Marvin be truly funny before. The physical humor was amazing. His pants were falling down around his ankles, and he was leaning against a shed with a drunk horse. He was singing "Happy Birthday" at a funeral because he was too drunk to know what was going on. The movie was made in only 32 days and with a very small budget. No one thought it would be a success. It made more than $20 million at the North American box office, making it the 7th highest grossing movie of 1965. Marvin won the BAFTA, the Golden Globe, and the Academy Award for Best Actor. Now, kept his acceptance speech short and ended with the line, "I think half of this belongs to a horse somewhere out in the San Fernando Valley." The crowd went wild. It is now one of the most famous Oscar speeches of all time. The 41-year-old villain suddenly became the main character. Nobody thought Cat Ballou would be a hit because it was a low-budget movie. It was made with an actor who no one would have cast as a comedian. It brought in more than $20 million and won the star an Oscar. The role that Kirk Douglas turned down started the last and most famous part of Lee Marvin's career. Betty Marvin, his ex-wife, says that he wasn't really acting in those drunk scenes either, but that's a story for another time. 7th, the man who couldn't sing knocked the Beatles off the top spot. In 1969, Marvin starred in Paint Your Wagon with Clint Eastwood. It was a musical western based on the 1951 Broadway show by Lerner and Love. It was an odd choice for 2 actors who are known for shooting people, not singing to them. The movie cost about $20 million to make, but it didn't do well at the American box office. But something strange happened in another country. Marvin's version of Wandering Star, a sad song about a drifter who can never settle down, was released as a single in the UK. Gene Saberg, his co-star, said his voice sounded like rain gurgling down a rusty pipe. Someone else said it was the first record that played at 45 revolutions per minute, but was made at 33 revolutions per minute. Lee Marvin couldn't sing. He was aware of it. He didn't care. He didn't want a professional singer to sing over his voice, so he sang every note himself. In March 1970, Wandering Star went to number 1 in the United Kingdom and stayed there for 3 weeks. It also reached number 1 in Ireland for 2 weeks and number 10 in Australia. Let It Be by the Beatles was the song that kept it from reaching the top in Britain. Lee Marvin, a Marine who had been in combat and could barely hum, sold more records than the biggest band in popular music history. He never put out a second single. People still think of him as one of the most unlikely one-hit wonders in music history. In 2002, the song was played at punk legend Joe Strummer's funeral. This shows how raw and real Marvin made everything he touched. The Trial That Changed American Law is number 8. Marvin started dating a singer and actress named Michelle Triola in 1965, the same year he won the Oscar. They lived together for 5 years, but they never got married. When the relationship ended in 1970, Triola did something that no other woman in America had ever done. She changed her last name to Marvin legally and sued him for money as if they were married. Michelle Triola Marvin said that Lee had promised to help her for the rest of her life, that she had given up her singing career to be with him, and that he had gotten her pregnant 3 times, paying for 2 abortions and losing the baby in the first one. The second abortion left her unable to have children. She wanted half of everything Marvin had made while they were together, which led to the case Marvin v. Marvin. In 1976, the case went all the way to the California Supreme Court, which came up with the term palimony, which the press quickly adopted. The court said that couples who aren't married can still make agreements about property and support that can be enforced, even if they don't have a formal marriage contract. It was a historic ruling that changed the way family law works throughout the country. The trial court turned down Triola's request for half of Marvin's property in 1979, but it did give her $14,000 to help her get better. The amount of money was small, but the legal precedent was huge. Law schools still teach Marvin v. Marvin, and every palimony case that has been filed since then can be traced back to Lee Marvin's living room. In the meantime, Marvin had already moved on. He married his childhood sweetheart, Pamela Feely, in October 1970, the same year he and Triola broke up. They were together until the day he died. 17 years of silence that never made the news. Number 9, the hardest drinker in Hollywood in the fight with the lumberjacks. Even by old Hollywood standards, Lee Marvin's drinking was legendary. And old Hollywood could drink. He said in an interview in 1973 that he was a drunk and had been drunk most of his adult life. He liked to drink beer with vodka chasers starting at breakfast. Josh Logan, who directed Marvin and Paint Your Wagon, said that Marvin drank a case of beer every day while they were filming. While filming The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, John Wayne had to carry Marvin to his trailer after he passed out between scenes. In 1966, Burt Lancaster almost threw him off a mountain in The Professionals. Richard Brooks, the director, had to step in because Lancaster was so angry at Marvin's unreliability when he was drunk. But this is the part that makes Lee Marvin's kind of chaos stand out. He was filming on location in Oregon when he walked into a bar and got into a fight with a whole team of lumberjacks. Not just one lumberjack, but a whole team. Several witnesses said that Marvin, who was in his 40s at the time, was able to hold his own against several younger men until the state police came to break it up. The next morning, there were new bruises all over. He got to set on time, turned down medical help, and didn't ask for any changes to the schedule. Lee Marvin did that on Tuesday. Samuel Fuller was the director who worked with Marvin on The Big Red One. I told him that Lee had seen the worst of people during the war, which gave him a philosophical view that you wouldn't expect. One minute he could be talking about Ernest Hemingway, and the next he could be showing you the best way to take out an opponent. He finally paid the price for all the drinking. Marvin quit drinking cold turkey in 1977 after his doctor showed him x-rays of his liver. He stayed sober for the rest of his life. The hardest drinker in Hollywood just quit. No 12-step program or rehab. He was able to stay sober because of the same willpower that got him through 21 amphibious assaults and a year of rehab for a severed nerve. In a 1969 interview with Playboy, he said that he was one of the first famous people in Hollywood to support the gay rights movement. He also said that he had no problem playing gay characters because he was sure of who he was. In 1969, it was almost unheard of for a Marine combat veteran and Hollywood tough guy to take that kind of public stance. Lee Marvin didn't show bravery, he just had it. The headstone is number 10. That doesn't say anything about a movie. Marvin kept working through the late 1970s and 1980s, but he didn't have as many leading roles after he stopped drinking. In 1981, he worked with Charles Bronson again on Death Hunt. Vincent Canby of the New York Times said that two old pros were at work and that each of them could easily make a character out of nothing. In 1980, he starred in Samuel Fuller's The Big Red One, a war movie based on Fuller's own experiences in battle. Marvin thought it was one of the best things he had ever done. He was very clear that he liked movies that showed the real side of war, not the glamorized version. He once said that The Dirty Dozen, his most successful movie, was nothing like the actual war, which he hated. He liked Hell in the Pacific and The Big Red One a lot better because they showed how strongly he was against war. The man who fought in 21 amphibious assaults came home completely against war and spoke out against Vietnam in public. He made his last movie, The Delta Force, with Chuck Norris in 1986. By then, his health was getting worse. He was hospitalized with coccidiomycosis, a fungal infection also known as valley fever, the same year. The steroids he took to help him breathe caused his intestines to break, which meant he needed a colostomy. Lee Marvin died of a heart attack at his home in Tucson, Arizona on August 29, 1987. He was 63 years old. He had his wife Pamela with him. He had been in the hospital for more than 2 weeks before he died. He was said to have a run-down condition related to the flu. Marvin was eligible for a full military funeral because he had served in combat. He was buried in Section 7A of Arlington National Cemetery, right below the tomb of the unknown soldier. This area is only for distinguished veterans. His grave is next to Joe Louis's, who was a heavyweight boxing champion. There is no mention of the Oscar on his headstone, which says Lee Marvin, PFC, U.S. Marine Corps, World War II. They don't talk about Cat Ballou, The Dirty Dozen, or Point Blank. There was no mention of Liberty Valance, the #1 hit record, or the famous court case that changed American law, just his name, rank, branch, and war. Marvin wasn't a sentimental person, so he only kept 4 things from his whole career. Hit were Wandering Star, his Best Actor Oscar for Cat Ballou, and the high-heeled shoe that Vivian Leigh once hit him with on the set of a movie. Jeff Bridges said that seeing Lee Marvin and Robert Ryan work together in The Iceman Comics made him want to be an actor for good. Bridges was surprised that, even though they played tough guys, they were very nice and generous actors. Anyone who knew Lee Marvin shouldn't have been surprised by that. The man who couldn't sit through a class could sit still for hours in a deer blind. 10 years before it was safe, the man who fought lumberjacks in bars stood up for gay rights. The actor who played the scariest bad guys in Hollywood picked a headstone that didn't say anything about movies but everything about service. 10 moments kicked out of 15 schools with blue blood ties. 21 attacks on land and water in the Pacific. A machine gun burst on Saipan that cut a nerve and changed the course of a life. A broken toilet that caused a stage. The scariest bad guy John Ford ever filmed. Won an Oscar for playing a drunk who gave half of it to a horse. A voice so bad that it knocked the Beatles off the top spot. A trial that made up the word palimony and changed the law in the U.S. A fight between lumberjacks and the most famous thirst in Hollywood. A grave marker at Arlington that doesn't mention a single film. Lee Marvin spent his whole career playing dangerous men. He didn't have to reach very far, to be honest.
There was a real danger. The scars were real. And the man with the gray hair and the gruff voice had seen things that most actors can only pretend to understand. Hollywood made him out to be the toughest man on screen. Arlington buried him as a soldier. The second version was chosen for his headstone. And that tells you all you need to know. You knew the face if you watched Dirty Dozen, Cat Ballou, or the man who shot Liberty Valance as a kid. You now know who the man is. What moment shocked you the most? The 15 schools, the plumber who accidentally walked onto a stage, the song that beat the Beatles, and the headstone that didn't care about Hollywood at all. Please tell us in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe to get more stories about real people who live lives that seemed impossible. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps us grow. Thanks for watching.